Hey guys, tonight we begin with a question that might keep you up despite my best efforts. What if everything we thought we knew about the birth of civilization was completely backwards? For over a century, archaeologists believed they had human development figured out. First came farming, then villages, then cities, and finally, once people had enough free time and surplus food, they built temples and monuments. Simple, logical, and according to a hilltop in Turkey, entirely wrong. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I'm always curious whether you're settling in for the night or listening during the day. If you remember when archaeology meant Indiana Jones-style adventures rather than ground-penetrating radar, or if you've ever visited ancient sites that made you question our understanding of the past, I'd especially love to hear your stories down below. Your generation witnessed the transformation of archaeology from treasure hunting to rigorous science. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. What if everything you thought you knew about civilization was wrong? For millennia, we believed agriculture and cities came first, that humans needed to settle down, develop farming, and create surplus before they could dream of building monuments. But a site in Turkey is rewriting history, forcing us to throw out our carefully constructed timeline and start again from scratch. Imagine a massive temple built by hunter-gatherers thousands of years before the first farms or towns existed anywhere on Earth. This is Göbekli Tepe, and its secrets will shatter your perception of humanity's past. Forget pyramids in ancient Rome. The true dawn of monumental architecture lies hidden in plain sight. 12,000 years ago, discovered in southeastern Turkey near the Syrian border, Göbekli Tepe isn't just old, it's older than anything we thought possible. It's a colossal temple complex built by people we considered incapable of such feats. People without metal tools, without the wheel, without domesticated animals to help with the labor. Prepare to uncover enigmatic carvings and celestial alignments that hint at a profound spiritual purpose. Constructed long before the rise of settled societies, before anyone planted the first seed of wheat. Step back in time, not to the Egypt you know, but to a place far older, far more mysterious. We're venturing into the desolate landscape of Göbekli Tepe, the world's first temple, constructed by hunter-gatherers when woolly mammoths still walked the earth, and the last ice age was barely in humanity's rearview mirror. This isn't just an archaeological site. It's a puzzle carved in stone, challenging every assumption we hold about humanity's earliest complex structures and spiritual beliefs. Are you ready to see history redefined? Imagine a world without agriculture, without cities, without even pottery or permanent shelter. Now imagine a monumental temple built in that world, not by accident, not by some anomalous group, but deliberately, with planning and purpose that would make modern engineers nod with respect. This is the contradiction at the heart of Göbekli Tepe, an archaeological impossibility sitting on a limestone plateau in what is now southeastern Turkey, about 9 miles northeast of the city of Şanlıurfa. The site covers roughly 22 acres on an artificial hill or tell created by countless generations, building, using, abandoning, and building again. But unlike most tells, which accumulated gradually over time as villages built upon their own ruins, Göbekli Tepe appears to have been intentionally buried, covered with thousands of tons of fill containing animal bones, flint tools, and the debris of ancient feasting. Someone went to considerable effort to hide it, to seal it beneath the earth like a time capsule or a secret too important to leave exposed. When German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt first surveyed the site in 1994, local people knew it as Potbelly Hill, a name that turned out to be oddly appropriate given the rounded shape of the tell. Schmidt noticed that the hilltop was covered with flint, chips, tools, debris, far more than any natural deposit would contain. Previous surveys in the 1960s had dismissed the site as merely an abandoned medieval cemetery, nothing more. But Schmidt saw something else. He saw the potential for something far older, something that shouldn't exist according to every textbook written about the Neolithic Revolution. The first excavations revealed what appeared to be massive stone circles, each containing dozens of T-shaped limestone pillars. Some stood upright, tall as a two-story building. Others lay toppled or broken, their pieces scattered like a giant's discarded toys. And carved into nearly every surface were animals, not the cattle and sheep and goats of settled farmers, but wild creatures, foxes, gazelles, wild boar, snakes, scorpions, and above all, vultures, birds of death, wings spread, circling over scenes we can only partially decipher 12 millennia later. But here's where things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean completely unprecedented in the archaeological record. Dating of the site produced results that made sense only if you were willing to throw out everything you thought you knew about human development. The oldest structures at Göbekli Tepe date to approximately 9600 BCE, making them 11,600 years old. To put that in perspective, these monuments were already ancient, already buried and forgotten when the first stones were laid at Stonehenge. They were old when the Egyptians were figuring out how to cut granite. They predate pottery, predate metalworking, predate agriculture itself, those who studied archaeology in school, and many of you did. In those post-war years, when universities expanded and veterans took advantage of the GI Bill, we'll remember the neat progression we were taught. First came hunter-gatherers, nomadic and simple, living hand to mouth. Then came agriculture, which allowed people to settle in one place. Settlement led to surplus. Surplus led to specialization, and specialization eventually led to civilization, with all its trappings, including monumental architecture and organized religion. It was logical, it was sensible, it was apparently wrong. Göbekli Tepe shatters that timeline completely. Here we have hunter-gatherers, people with no permanent villages, no domesticated crops, no complex social hierarchies that we can detect, building circular temple complexes that required thousands of person-hours of coordinated labor. They quarried limestone blocks weighing up to 50 tons. They carved those blocks into precise T-shapes. They transported them up the hill without wheels or draft animals. They erected them into position without metal tools or sophisticated hoisting equipment that we can identify. And they carved them with such artistic sophistication that we're still deciphering the symbols today. This wasn't a one-time feat either. The site contains at least 20 circular enclosures, though only a fraction have been excavated. Ground-penetrating radar suggests hundreds more pillars still lie buried beneath the surface, waiting for future archaeologists to uncover. Each enclosure follows a similar pattern, a ring of smaller T-shaped pillars surrounding two larger central pillars, all facing inward toward the center. The central pillars often stand 15 to 18 feet tall. They're not just carved, they're sculpted to suggest arms and hands, as if the T-shape represents a stylized human figure, eternally watching, eternally waiting. The scale alone would be impressive for any society. For hunter-gatherers, it's nothing short of miraculous. Consider the logistics: identifying suitable limestone deposits, quarrying massive blocks using stone tools, shaping those blocks into the distinctive T-form, transporting them perhaps half a mile uphill, positioning them precisely, and then spending countless hours carving elaborate reliefs into their surfaces. This wasn't casual work done during slow seasons. This was a monumental undertaking requiring organization, planning, and most importantly, a shared purpose powerful enough to motivate hundreds, perhaps thousands of people to contribute their labor. And then, after perhaps 1,000 years of use, they buried it all. Deliberately, methodically, they filled the enclosures with debris and rubble, covered the pillars, and walked away. Some enclosures show signs of having been ritually closed. Pillars were sometimes toppled before burial, perhaps to deactivate them, to end whatever spiritual power they held. It's as if they decided the site had served its purpose and needed to be sealed, preserved beneath tons of earth and stone. For most of the 20th century, the story of civilization's origins was well established, taught in every school, repeated in every textbook. Agriculture came first. Settlement followed, and only then, once people had stable food supplies and free time, did they develop complex religion and build monuments. V. Gordon Childe, the influential Australian archaeologist, coined the term Neolithic Revolution in the 1930s to describe this transformation. Agriculture wasn't just a new technology, it was the revolution that made everything else possible. The logic seemed sound enough. Hunter-gatherers, constantly on the move in search of game and wild plants, barely had time to make art, let alone build permanent structures. They needed to find food every single day. The archaeological evidence appeared to support this. The first farming villages in the Near East dated to around 9500 BCE, and the first monumental architecture, things like city walls and temples, came hundreds or thousands of years later. First you plant grain, then you settle down, then you build cities, then you construct temples, a straight line from simple to complex. Göbekli Tepe doesn't just challenge this timeline, it obliterates it. Here we have monumental architecture, sophisticated planned, labor-intensive construction, appearing not after agriculture, but before it. The people who built these stone circles were still hunting gazelle and wild boar. They were still gathering wild cereals and nuts. They hadn't domesticated sheep or goats yet. They hadn't even invented pottery. And yet they gathered, perhaps from hundreds of miles away, to build and maintain a ceremonial site that required more organization and effort than we thought possible for their level of social development. Klaus Schmidt, the excavation director until his death in 2014, proposed a revolutionary idea. What if we had the causation backwards? What if it wasn't agriculture that enabled the construction of monuments, but rather the need to build monuments that drove the development of agriculture? Think about it. If you're gathering hundreds of people at a sacred site for ceremonial purposes, you need to feed them. If you're doing this regularly, year after year, you need reliable food sources nearby. Perhaps the pressure to support large gatherings at places like Göbekli Tepe forced people to start experimenting with planting and harvesting wild grains, to start herding and breeding the animals they hunted. In other words, religion might have come first. Shared spiritual belief, powerful enough to motivate massive cooperative projects, might have been the catalyst that transformed human society from mobile hunter-gatherers to settled farmers. The temple preceded the city. The sacred site preceded the village. Ritual drove the revolution, not the other way around. Now, this is still debated among scholars, and we should acknowledge that honest debate. Some archaeologists argue that small-scale agriculture might have already begun when Göbekli Tepe was constructed, that we simply haven't found the evidence yet. Others suggest that the builders might have been more sedentary than we assume, perhaps living in semi-permanent camps that left few archaeological traces. Still others point out that hunter-gatherers with abundant resources, think of the salmon-fishing peoples of the Pacific Northwest, who built elaborate ceremonial structures despite never farming, have always been capable of more complexity than we give them credit for. But regardless of which came first, the chicken or the egg, or in this case, the temple or the farm, the undeniable fact remains. Göbekli Tepe demonstrates that hunter-gatherer societies were far more capable of organization, planning, and monumental construction than anyone imagined possible. These weren't simple, nomadic bands barely scraping by. These were people with rich cultural lives, complex belief systems, and the ability to coordinate labor on a massive scale. Those who served in the military, who remember the massive logistical undertakings required to move equipment and personnel, will appreciate what this means. You don't just show up with 10,000 tons of cut limestone and figure it out as you go. Someone had to plan the quarrying operations. Someone had to organize work crews. Someone had to coordinate the transportation. Someone had to maintain food supplies for the workers. Someone had to train specialists in carving and construction techniques. This required leadership, hierarchical organization, and most critically, a shared ideology powerful enough that people willingly contributed their labor. And here's the thing that really challenges our assumptions. They did all this without writing, without any system for recording plans or passing on technical knowledge beyond oral tradition and hands-on training. Every technique, every ritual practice, every symbolic meaning encoded in those carvings, all of it existed only in memory and demonstration. Imagine coordinating a construction project spanning generations, perhaps centuries, where every instruction, every measurement, every cultural meaning must be memorized and taught directly. No blueprints, no instruction manuals, just human memory and human hands. Let's talk about these pillars themselves, because once you understand what they are, what they represent, the audacity of Göbekli Tepe becomes even more staggering. The T-shaped design isn't accidental or purely functional. Look at them long enough, and you start to see what the builders intended. These are stylized human figures, or perhaps more accurately, anthropomorphic beings. The vertical shaft is the body. The horizontal crosspiece represents arms or shoulders. Some pillars even have carved arms and hands, bent at the elbows, with hands meeting at what would be the waist or belly. Below the hands, many pillars feature carved belts decorated with what might be foxtails or other symbolic elements. These aren't just markers or structural elements. They're representations of something. Ancestors, spirits, deities, we can't be certain. But their anthropomorphic quality is deliberate and consistent across the site. They're meant to be seen as beings watching over the ceremonial space, perhaps participating in whatever rituals occurred within these stone circles. Standing among them, even today, creates an uncanny sensation. They're too large to be human, too stylized to be portraits, yet undeniably person-like in their presence. The size alone demands respect. The largest pillars stand about 18 feet tall and weigh somewhere between 40 and 60 tons. That's roughly the weight of a loaded semi-truck, except instead of rolling on 18 wheels, these blocks had to be quarried, shaped, transported, and erected using only human muscle, simple leverage, and stone tools. The engineering involved staggers the imagination. Even with modern equipment, moving a 50-ton block of limestone is a significant undertaking. Now do it without metal tools, without wheels, without draft animals, without cranes or hoisting equipment more sophisticated than wooden levers and rope. The quarries where the stones originated lie about a quarter mile from the main site. We know this because several pillars still lie in the quarries, abandoned mid-production. One unfinished pillar, still attached to the bedrock, would have been the largest yet discovered, over 23 feet long, weighing perhaps 70 tons. For reasons we'll never know, the work stopped. The carvers set down their stone tools and never returned. That pillar remains where they left it, a snapshot of ancient labor frozen in limestone. How did they move these massive stones? The archaeological record offers few clues. No sledges have been found, no rollers, no ramps. We're left to speculate based on what's physically possible with Neolithic technology. Likely they used wooden rollers and large numbers of people pulling with ropes braided from plant fibers. Perhaps they waited for seasonal rains to soften the ground, making transport easier. Perhaps they built temporary ramps of earth and stone that were later removed or eroded away. The truth is, we don't know for certain, and that uncertainty only deepens the mystery. Those who worked construction, who've moved heavy equipment or building materials, know that half the battle is simply not crushing someone in the process. 50 tons doesn't forgive mistakes. There's no room for error when you're using primitive leverage to tip a multi-ton pillar upright. One mistake, one broken rope, one miscalculation of weight distribution, and people die. And yet, across centuries of construction at Göbekli Tepe, they apparently managed this feat dozens of times, erecting pillar after pillar, enclosure after enclosure, without the catastrophic failures we might expect. But the truly remarkable aspect isn't just the engineering, it's the art. Nearly every surface is carved, not with crude scratches or simple geometric designs, but with sophisticated reliefs depicting an entire bestiary of Neolithic wildlife. Foxes with bushy tails, wild boars with prominent tusks, gazelles in mid-leap, aurochs, the extinct wild cattle that were among the largest land animals in the region, snakes coiled and striking, scorpions with stingers raised, and everywhere, constantly, vultures with wings spread wide. The vultures deserve special attention because they appear more frequently than any other animal, and their symbolic significance has sparked endless scholarly debate. In many cultures, vultures are associated with death, with the removal of flesh from bones, with the transformation of the dead. Some archaeologists believe Göbekli Tepe might have been a site for excarnation, the practice of exposing dead bodies to scavengers, particularly birds. As part of burial rituals, the bones would later be collected and interred elsewhere. This practice was documented in various ancient cultures across the Middle East, so it's not implausible. But vultures might also represent transformation, the transition from one state to another, the necessary destruction that precedes renewal. Or they might have astronomical significance, representing constellations or celestial events. Or they might be clan totems, emblems of particular groups who gathered at the site. The truth is, we're interpreting symbols from a culture dead 12,000 years, and certainty is impossible. What we can say is that vultures mattered deeply to these people, appeared constantly in their religious imagery, and were important enough to carve repeatedly into pillars that required immense labor to create. The precision of these carvings raises questions that archaeologists are still trying to answer. We're not talking about crude scratches or simple outlines. These are sophisticated relief carvings showing depth, perspective, and anatomical accuracy. The animals are identifiable by species. Their postures suggest movement. Their proportions are correct. Whoever carved these had observed wildlife closely, understood anatomy, and possessed the technical skill to translate that knowledge into stone, using tools that would make modern sculptors weep with frustration. Consider the tools available. Primarily flint, perhaps some harder stones like diorite or basalt for pecking and grinding. No metal whatsoever. Bronze wouldn't be invented for another 6,000 years. Iron for 7,000. To carve limestone with stone tools requires patience that borders on meditation. You peck away at the surface, tiny chip by tiny chip, gradually deepening the relief, gradually revealing the form hidden in the stone. It's not carving in the sense we usually think of it, with chisels biting into wood. It's more like erosion, deliberately controlled erosion, wearing away everything that isn't the image you're trying to create. Modern experimental archaeology has attempted to recreate these techniques. Researchers using authentic Neolithic stone tools estimated that carving a single animal relief roughly 3 feet by 2 feet would require somewhere between 50 and 100 hours of steady work by a skilled craftsperson. And that's assuming you know what you're doing, assuming you've already mastered the technique through years of practice. For a beginner, multiply that time significantly. Now consider that some pillars contain dozens of carved images, that the site contains hundreds of pillars, and you begin to appreciate the sheer volume of specialized labor invested in this place. This wasn't work that could be done by just anyone. Carving stone is a skill that requires training, practice, and talent. You need to understand how stone fractures, how to control your strikes, how to maintain edge on your tools, how to work with the grain and structure of the limestone. You need artistic ability to envision the final form and execute it accurately. This suggests a degree of social specialization we didn't think existed in hunter-gatherer societies. People who spent enough time carving that they became experts, people who were presumably supported by the labor of others while they devoted themselves to this craft. But beyond the individual carvings, there's the question of the overall design and layout. The enclosures aren't randomly arranged. They follow a consistent pattern. Outer ring of pillars, 2 central pillars, all arranged in precise circles. The spacing is regular. The orientation appears deliberate, though scholars debate exactly what celestial or directional alignments might be intended. Some enclosures are perfectly circular, with geometric precision that suggests they were laid out using a central point and measuring cord, the ancient equivalent of a compass. The floors of the enclosures present another puzzle. In several circles, the floor was covered with terrazzo, a type of lime plaster made by burning limestone, mixing it with water and aggregate, and then polishing it smooth. This is sophisticated construction technology. Making lime plaster requires temperatures of about 800 to 900 degrees Celsius, sustained for hours. You need substantial fuel, probably wood, lots of wood, and you need to understand the chemical transformation that occurs when limestone is heated. This isn't knowledge you stumble upon accidentally. Someone experimented, someone learned, someone taught others. Those who've worked with concrete or masonry know that getting a smooth, level floor isn't trivial, even with modern tools and materials. Now imagine doing it with Neolithic technology over an area perhaps 40 feet in diameter, getting it level enough that water doesn't pool, smooth enough that people can walk barefoot comfortably. And they succeeded. The terrazzo floors at Göbekli Tepe are remarkably well executed, showing technical knowledge that supposedly wouldn't be developed for thousands of years. Everything about the construction suggests planning on a scale that defies our assumptions about hunter-gatherer capabilities. This wasn't built spontaneously. Someone designed these enclosures. Someone calculated the number and size of pillars needed. Someone organized the labor force. Someone maintained institutional knowledge across generations. Because construction at Göbekli Tepe continued for roughly 1,500 years, from approximately 90 to 600 BCE to 8200 BCE. That's a span of time equivalent to the entire period from the fall of Rome to the Renaissance. Imagine maintaining consistent architectural traditions, consistent symbolic systems, consistent religious practices across that vast temporal distance, all without writing. Now, let's address what might be the most controversial aspect of Göbekli Tepe, the theory that it functioned as an astronomical observatory, that the carvings encode celestial knowledge, and that the alignments of the pillars track specific astronomical events. This is where archaeology meets speculation, where hard evidence gives way to educated guessing, and where honest scholars can examine the same stones and reach completely different conclusions. The idea gained prominence in recent years when some researchers noticed that the animals carved on the pillars might correspond to constellations. The vulture, for instance, could represent Cygnus, The Swan constellation, which was positioned differently in the night sky 12,000 years ago due to precession of the equinoxes. The Scorpion could be Scorpius. The Bull, less common at Göbekli Tepe but present, could be Taurus. String them together and you have what looks like a star map carved in stone. Moreover, one particular pillar, known as the Vulture Stone, contains what some interpret as a record of a cosmic catastrophe. The pillar shows a vulture, a headless man, a scorpion, and other symbols arranged in a specific configuration. Some researchers argue this depicts the positions of constellations as they would have appeared around 10,950 BCE. Coinciding with the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, the theory that a comet or asteroid struck Earth roughly 13,000 years ago, causing rapid climate change and megafauna extinctions. If true, this would mean Göbekli Tepe preserves humanity's oldest written message, a warning about cosmic catastrophe, a record of astronomical observations, an attempt to preserve knowledge for future generations. It's a thrilling theory, the kind that makes excellent television documentaries and generates passionate debates at archaeological conferences. But here's where we need to pump the brakes and acknowledge uncertainty. Correlation doesn't prove causation. Just because carved animals might represent constellations doesn't mean they definitely do. Ancient peoples carved animals for many reasons, as clan totems, as representations of spirits or gods, as symbolic references to qualities like strength or cunning, as records of successful hunts, or simply because they admired the creatures. Assuming every animal carving is astronomical in nature might be projecting our modern fascination with astronomy onto a culture that had completely different concerns. Furthermore, the astronomical alignment theories often suffer from what's called selection bias. If you look hard enough for alignments, you'll find them, especially when dealing with circular arrangements of stones. Göbekli Tepe has dozens of pillars positioned at various angles. Some will inevitably align with solstice sunrises or moonrises or prominent stars, simply by chance. The question isn't whether alignments exist, but whether they were intentional, and that's much harder to prove. Scholars who are skeptical of the astronomical interpretation point out that similar animal symbolism appears in many prehistoric cultures without clear celestial significance. They argue that we're imposing modern categories onto ancient thought, that the boundary between earthly animal and celestial constellation might not have existed for these people the way it does for us. Perhaps the vulture was both earthly bird and celestial entity, both literal creature and spiritual symbol, without any need to choose between interpretations. What we can say with reasonable certainty is that the builders of Göbekli Tepe were concerned with orientation and alignment. The two central pillars in each enclosure typically face southeast, though there's variation. Some researchers note that this direction roughly aligns with the rising point of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, as it would have appeared in the Neolithic period. Others point out that southeast is also the direction of the Taurus Mountains, a prominent geographical feature visible from the site. Was it astronomical? Geographical? Both? Neither, but rather aligned to some cultural or mythological direction we no longer understand? Historians of science remind us that ancient peoples everywhere were keen observers of the sky. Without artificial light, with crystal clear air, living outdoors for much of the time, they would have been intimately familiar with celestial patterns. The moon's phase, the sun's seasonal movements, the rising and setting points of prominent stars and planets, all of this would have been common knowledge, woven into their understanding of time, seasons, and sacred cycles. So yes, Göbekli Tepe almost certainly incorporated astronomical knowledge, but whether it was primarily an observatory or whether celestial awareness was simply one aspect of a much broader ritual complex remains genuinely uncertain. Those of you who remember when amateur astronomy was popular, looking through telescopes at the moon, tracking satellites, learning constellations, understand the appeal of the night sky. Without television or internet, without even books for most of human existence, the stars were entertainment, calendar, compass, and mystery, all rolled into one. If you wanted to know when to expect the rainy season, you watched the stars. If you needed to navigate at night, you watched the stars. If you wondered about humanity's place in the cosmos, you watched the stars. Any culture sophisticated enough to build Göbekli Tepe was definitely watching the stars. Let's step back from cosmic speculation and return to something more concrete: the animals themselves. The menagerie carved into Göbekli Tepe's pillars tells us something about the environment these people inhabited, the creatures they encountered, and perhaps the qualities they valued or feared. This is a landscape very different from the agricultural terrain that would later develop in this region. The wild boar appears frequently, rendered with prominent tusks and muscular shoulders. These were dangerous animals, aggressive when cornered, capable of killing a hunter with those tusks. But they were also valuable. Hundreds of pounds of meat, hide, and fat. Boar hunting required courage and coordination. In many cultures, successfully hunting boar was a mark of adulthood, of proven bravery. Their frequent appearance at Göbekli Tepe might reflect their importance both as resource and as symbol of wilderness mastery. Gazelles, more delicate, are shown in running or leaping poses. These were the primary prey animal in the region, fast and skittish, requiring different hunting techniques, perhaps ambush, perhaps driving herds toward waiting hunters. The bones found in the fill at Göbekli Tepe are primarily from gazelles, confirming their importance as food source. Their grace and speed might have held symbolic meaning as well. Freedom, swiftness, the untamable quality of wild nature. Snakes appear often, sometimes coiled, sometimes in striking positions. In a landscape where venomous vipers were common, snakes represented real danger. A bite could kill, especially far from any medical help more sophisticated than herbal poultices. But snakes also shed their skins, appearing to be reborn, making them powerful symbols of transformation and renewal in many ancient cultures. Were the snakes at Göbekli Tepe warnings, protective symbols, or representations of spiritual metamorphosis? Perhaps all three simultaneously. The scorpions are particularly interesting because, while several species of scorpion inhabit the region, they're relatively small and not typically fatal to healthy adults. Yet they appear with disproportionate frequency in the carvings, often quite large and prominently displayed. This suggests their significance was more symbolic than practical. Perhaps their sting represented transformation through ordeal, or their appearance in dark corners made them creatures of mystery and hidden knowledge. Foxes appear in surprising numbers, sometimes in groups, sometimes with exaggerated bushy tails. Foxes are clever, adaptable twilight hunters that move between human and wild spaces. They're neither fully domesticated nor fully wild. In many mythological systems, foxes are trickster figures, boundary crossers, possessors of cunning and shape-shifting abilities. Their prominence at Göbekli Tepe might reflect admiration for these qualities, or perhaps some now lost mythological narrative in which foxes played a central role. And then there are the more exotic creatures, animals that might not have been common in the immediate vicinity but clearly held significance. Possible depictions of leopards or lions, large predators that were present in the Near East during this period but probably not abundant. Their power and danger would have been legendary. To kill such a creature, or even to survive an encounter, would mark someone as exceptional. Their appearance in the carvings might represent elite status, warrior prowess, or spiritual power. Some carvings defy easy identification. There are strange creatures that don't quite match any known species, composite animals that blend features of multiple creatures, and abstract symbols whose meaning remains completely opaque. Were these mythological beasts, spiritual entities, clan emblems, artistic experimentation? We're looking at visual language from a culture without Rosetta Stone to help us decode it. What's notably rare, almost absent, are depictions of domesticated animals. There are no clear representations of dogs, despite dogs having been domesticated for thousands of years by this point. No sheep, no goats, no cattle. Animals that would dominate the visual culture of later agricultural societies. This is a purely wild bestiary, a world before human mastery of nature, when humans were still thoroughly embedded in the ecological community rather than standing apart from it. If you've hunted, and many of you have, whether deer in Pennsylvania or elk in Wyoming, you understand the relationship between hunter and prey in ways that suburban and urban people often don't. There's respect there, even reverence. You study the animal, learn its habits, understand its mind. The kill itself is only the final moment of a much longer engagement. Perhaps that relationship, that deep knowledge of wild creatures and their behavior, is what we're seeing carved into these pillars. Not just pictures of animals, but representations of relationships, acknowledgments of connections, records of encounters that mattered. Now comes the harder question. Who exactly built this place? Not their names. Those are lost forever. But who they were, culturally, socially, economically. What kind of society produces Göbekli Tepe? This question has generated as much scholarly debate as the site itself, because the answer challenges fundamental assumptions about social organization and cultural development. The traditional model of hunter-gatherer societies emphasizes small, mobile bands of perhaps 25 to 50 individuals, each band moving seasonally through a territory, following game and plant resources. Leadership would be minimal and informal. Social hierarchy would be relatively flat. No kings, no priests, no permanent positions of power. Everyone contributes to survival. Everyone shares in the resources. This model drawn from ethnographic studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, has been the baseline for understanding our ancestors. Göbekli Tepe doesn't fit that model at all. You don't build a site like this with informal temporary leadership and ad hoc organization. You need planning. You need coordination across multiple groups. You need specialists, skilled carvers, knowledgeable surveyors, experienced construction supervisors. You need ways to mobilize labor, to feed workers, to maintain institutional memory across generations. In other words, you need social complexity that supposedly didn't exist yet. Klaus Schmidt proposed that Göbekli Tepe functioned as a regional ceremonial center, a pilgrimage site where scattered hunter-gatherer groups from across a vast territory would gather periodically for ritual purposes. The site sits at the headwaters of several streams that flow down into the Mesopotamian plain. It's visible from considerable distances. It's positioned at the boundary between different ecological zones, hills to the north, plains to the south, creating an edge environment rich in resources. Groups living within perhaps a 100-mile radius might have considered this sacred ground, neutral territory, where rival bands could gather without conflict. Perhaps they came annually, following the agricultural calendar we usually associate with farmers, but which hunter-gatherers also followed: the ripening of certain wild plants, the seasonal migration of game animals. Perhaps they came for initiation ceremonies, marriages, trading of exotic goods, and the sharing of information and stories. The evidence supports this interpretation. Animal bones found in the fill layers, the debris deliberately used to bury the enclosures, shows signs of feasting on a massive scale. Tens of thousands of bone fragments, primarily from gazelles, but also from aurochs, wild sheep, and wild boar. The bones show butchery marks, consistent with meat processing for large groups. Stone vessels that might have held beverages or ritual liquids, fire pits and hearths, the detritus of celebration or ceremony, accumulating over centuries. But here's what makes the pilgrimage theory so compelling. Göbekli Tepe shows no evidence of permanent habitation. No houses, no storage facilities, no wells or water sources within the immediate site, no trash heaps of the kind that accumulate around settlements. The site appears to have been used periodically, intensively, and then left empty until the next gathering. People came, they performed whatever rituals the enclosures hosted, they feasted, and then they returned to their normal territories. This pattern, monumental architecture at sites that weren't permanent settlements, would later become common in the Neolithic period. We see it at Çatalhöyük, at Jericho, at sites across the Fertile Crescent. But Göbekli Tepe is the earliest example we've found, predating these later ceremonial centers by thousands of years. It suggests that the impulse toward sacred architecture, toward creating special places for ritual and gathering, preceded the impulse toward permanent settlement. Those who served in the military understand the logistics of moving large groups of people temporarily to a location for a specific purpose. You need advanced planning. You need to know how many people are coming. You need to arrange food and water. You need to establish camp areas, sanitation, and organization. Now imagine doing all that without radios, without maps, without supply chains, relying entirely on oral communication and traditional knowledge. And imagine doing it successfully enough that construction continued for 1,500 years. The social implications are staggering. If Schmidt's pilgrimage theory is correct, then we're looking at social networks stretching across vast distances, maintained through periodic gatherings at shared ceremonial centers. Groups that might have been rivals or strangers most of the time came together at places like Göbekli Tepe under some form of ritual truce. They brought their labor, their expertise, their food contributions. They participated in shared ceremonies that reinforced cultural identity across the broader region. They exchanged information, goods, and probably marriage partners. This is sophisticated social organization. This is cultural cohesion maintained across geographic and temporal scales that we associate with agricultural chiefdoms or early states, not with hunter-gatherers. It forces us to revise our understanding of what pre-agricultural societies were capable of achieving. But there's another possibility, more radical. What if the division between hunter-gatherers and farmers wasn't as stark as we've assumed? What if the people building Göbekli Tepe were already experimenting with cultivation, already beginning to manipulate their environment in ways that don't leave clear archaeological traces? Wild cereals grow abundantly in this region. The transition from gathering them to actively encouraging their growth to actually planting them is gradual, not sudden. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe was built by people in transition, no longer purely hunter-gatherers, but not yet fully agricultural either. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Göbekli Tepe is how it ended. After roughly 1,500 years of use, a span of time that, let's remember, is longer than the entire history of the United States, the site was systematically, deliberately buried. This wasn't abandonment. This wasn't gradual decay or natural accumulation of sediment. This was purposeful closure carried out with the same planning and effort that had gone into the construction. Imagine the labor involved in burying these enclosures. Each circular chamber required thousands of tons of fill material, broken limestone, flint debris, animal bones, and soil. Someone organized work crews to dismantle parts of the structures, to transport fill material, to carefully entomb the pillars. Some pillars were toppled before burial, perhaps in a ritual deactivation, ending their spiritual power before sealing them away. Others were left standing, covered in situ, preserved exactly as they had stood during active use. Why? Why invest enormous effort into carefully burying what you'd already invested enormous effort into building? Archaeologists have proposed several theories, none entirely satisfying. Perhaps the site had served its purpose, fulfilled some prophesied timeline, and needed to be ritually closed. Perhaps environmental changes, the climate was shifting as the Ice Age finally ended, made the location less suitable for large gatherings. Perhaps social changes, the gradual shift toward more settled agricultural life, meant that the old pilgrimage centers were no longer needed or appropriate. Or perhaps, and this is purely speculative, the burial was protective, an attempt to preserve the site for future discovery. Maybe they knew their way of life was ending, that the agricultural revolution would transform the region beyond recognition, and they wanted to safeguard this sacred place from desecration or destruction. Maybe the burial was an act of love, of preservation, ensuring that the pillars would survive millennia to tell their story to whoever eventually uncovered them. If you've ever watched something important from your past disappear, whether buildings from your childhood or traditions that faded away or ways of life that no longer exist, you understand that strange mixture of loss and acceptance. The world changes. Sometimes we can only try to preserve what mattered, hoping future generations will understand its value even if they don't share its context. The burial worked. Göbekli Tepe survived intact, sealed under protective layers of fill for nearly 12,000 years, while countless other Neolithic sites were destroyed by erosion, agricultural plowing, or urban development. Göbekli Tepe waited, patient as stone, for the day when someone would notice the abundance of worked flint on Potbelly Hill and start asking questions. And here's where we stand today. Approximately 5% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. 5%. Ground-penetrating radar suggests at least 200 additional pillars remain buried, along with who knows what else. Every field season brings new discoveries, new complications, new questions. The more we learn, the less certain we become about our previous conclusions. For those of you who followed archaeological discoveries over the decades, from the Dead Sea Scrolls in your youth to recent findings, you know how the field works. Every discovery raises 10 new questions. Every answer requires revision of previous understanding. Göbekli Tepe is the ultimate example of this process. We thought we understood the Neolithic Revolution. We thought we knew how civilization began. And then, a hilltop in Turkey rewrote everything. Let's step back and consider what Göbekli Tepe means for our understanding of human history. This isn't just about one archaeological site. However impressive, it's about rewriting the narrative of how we became who we are, about challenging assumptions that have stood for a century, about recognizing that our ancestors were far more capable, more sophisticated, and more mysterious than we gave them credit for. The traditional story went like this. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived as hunter-gatherers, our population limited by available resources, our social structures simple, our cultural achievements minimal. Then, around 10,000 years ago, someone in the Fertile Crescent figured out agriculture. Wheat and barley were domesticated. Sheep and goats were domesticated. This agricultural revolution generated surplus food, which allowed population growth, which enabled specialization of labor, which led to villages, then towns, then cities, then civilization with all its trappings: writing, organized religion, monumental architecture, social hierarchy. Göbekli Tepe inverts this sequence. Monumental architecture appears before agriculture, before pottery, before permanent settlement. Complex social organization appears before the economic base that was supposed to make it possible. Organized religion, or at least organized ritual requiring massive communal effort, appears among hunter-gatherers rather than emerging from agricultural surplus. This forces us to reconsider cause and effect. For decades, archaeologists assumed that agriculture was the cause and civilization was the effect. First you farm, then you build. But what if ritual and religion were the actual driving forces? What if the need to gather for ceremonies, to maintain sacred sites, to support increasing numbers of people at pilgrimage centers, created the pressure that led to agricultural experimentation. Klaus Schmidt called this, "First came the temple, then the city." It's catchy, probably oversimplified, but it captures something important. Spiritual and social needs might have driven technological change rather than the reverse. People didn't develop agriculture because they were lazy and wanted easier food. They developed agriculture because they needed to feed the crowds gathering at places like Göbekli Tepe. They domesticated animals not just for food, but for ritual purposes, for sacrifice, for feasting that created and maintained social bonds. This matters because it suggests that human culture, art, ritual, religion, social cohesion, isn't something that emerges after basic survival needs are met. Culture doesn't wait for surplus. Culture might be just as fundamental to human survival as finding food, perhaps more so in some circumstances. The ability to cooperate, to share symbols and stories, to gather in common purpose. These might be what made us successful as a species, not just clever tool use and efficient resource exploitation. Those of you who lived through the space program's early days, who remember the massive national effort to reach the moon, understand how shared purpose can drive technological innovation. We didn't go to the moon because we needed to. We went because we wanted to, because it mattered culturally, because it unified a society toward a common goal. The technology followed the vision, not the other way around. Perhaps something similar happened at Göbekli Tepe. The vision came first: build sacred space, gather the people, maintain tradition, and the necessary technologies developed in response. But there's a darker interpretation worth considering. Some researchers suggest that the shift to agriculture wasn't entirely positive, that in many ways it reduced quality of life compared to hunter-gatherer existence. Early farmers worked harder than hunter-gatherers, ate worse diets leading to malnutrition and disease, lived in denser populations that facilitated epidemic illness, and developed social hierarchies that created inequality. If agriculture was so great, why did it take 2 million years of human existence before anyone bothered to invent it? Maybe, just maybe, agriculture was a trap that societies fell into when ritual obligations created unsustainable demands. Maybe Göbekli Tepe and similar sites required so much labor, so many feasting events, such large gatherings, that eventually people had no choice but to intensify food production. And once you start down that road, planting crops, tending them, storing surplus, defending stores from raiders, developing property concepts, there's no going back. You're locked into an agricultural lifestyle whether you like it or not. This interpretation is speculative, admittedly, but it's worth pondering. What if Göbekli Tepe represents not the dawn of civilization, but the end of something, the last flowering of hunter-gatherer culture before it was inevitably overwhelmed by the agricultural way of life it inadvertently helped create? What if those pillars are monuments not to progress, but to a world that was about to be lost forever? Göbekli Tepe didn't exist in isolation. As excavations have continued across southeastern Turkey and northern Syria, archaeologists have discovered numerous related sites, creating a picture of a broader cultural phenomenon we're only beginning to understand. Göbekli Tepe might be the oldest and most elaborate, but it was part of a tradition of stone circle building that persisted for thousands of years across the region. Nevali Sori, excavated in the 1980s before being flooded by a dam project, contained similar T-shaped pillars, though smaller and associated with actual settlement remains. The pillars there were incorporated into rectangular buildings rather than freestanding circular enclosures, suggesting an evolution in how sacred space was conceptualized. The site also yielded small sculptures, human faces, birds, animals that matched the artistic style of Göbekli Tepe, confirming they were part of the same cultural tradition. Karahan Tepe, discovered more recently, contains pillars that rival Göbekli Tepe in size and sophistication. Unlike Göbekli Tepe, where the pillars were erected on the surface, Karahan Tepe's structures were carved directly into bedrock, massive subterranean chambers with pillars rising from the floor. The labor involved in carving solid rock with stone tools makes Göbekli Tepe's construction look almost easy by comparison. The site is still being excavated, but early findings suggest it might be contemporary with Göbekli Tepe, expanding our understanding of how widespread this architectural tradition was. Then there's Sayonu, slightly later in date, but showing clear continuity with the Göbekli Tepe tradition. Sayonu was an actual village occupied year-round with rectangular houses and clear evidence of agricultural practice. But at its center stood a special building, a skull building, so called because it contained dozens of human skulls carefully arranged along with evidence of ritual activity. The building's floor was stained with blood, possibly from animal sacrifice, possibly from something else. It suggests that the ritual traditions developed at sites like Göbekli Tepe continued even as societies became settled and agricultural. Çatalhöyük, farther west in central Turkey, came later still, 7,500 to 5,800 BCE. By this time, agriculture was fully established, villages were densely populated, and social complexity was increasing dramatically. Yet, Çatalhöyük shows ritual practices that seem to echo the earlier tradition. Bulls' heads and horns were mounted on walls. Elaborate shrines contained paintings and sculptures of animals, particularly leopards and vultures. The dead were buried beneath house floors, their skulls sometimes removed and circulated separately. There's a continuity of symbols and practices stretching back to Göbekli Tepe, transmitted across thousands of years. Even farther afield, across the Near East and Mediterranean, we find echoes. The megalithic tradition that eventually produced Stonehenge, the Maltese temples, the passage tombs of Ireland. All of these appear thousands of years later, but they share something fundamental with Göbekli Tepe: the impulse to create permanent sacred spaces marked by massive stone construction. The techniques differ, the symbols differ, the societies that built them differ dramatically, but the underlying idea that certain places are so sacred they deserve monumental architecture to mark and contain them. That idea appears to trace back to these earliest stone circles in southeastern Turkey. This isn't to say Göbekli Tepe directly influenced later megalithic cultures. That's almost certainly not the case. But it suggests that when human societies reach certain levels of complexity, when social and spiritual needs create sufficient pressure, they independently develop similar solutions. Gather stones, raise them upright, Create spaces where the boundary between ordinary and sacred is marked in the most permanent material available. Those who visited Stonehenge or the Celtic monuments in Ireland or any of the great stone circles of Western Europe might not have realized they were seeing structures that echo traditions 10,000 years old. But next time you encounter megalithic architecture anywhere in the world, remember, it started here in southeastern Turkey with hunter-gatherers who decided that their gods or spirits or ancestors deserved monuments that would outlast empires. Let's get practical for a moment and consider the logistics of actually building and using Göbekli Tepe. We've talked about the monuments, the symbolism, the grand theories, but someone had to organize the food. Someone had to figure out where hundreds of people would camp. Someone had to coordinate work schedules and tool production and water supply. The mundane details matter because they tell us about organizational capability as much as the monuments themselves do. First, water. The site itself has no permanent water source. The nearest reliable spring is several hundred yards away. For a gathering of even 100 people, you need significant water for drinking, for food preparation, for tool production if you're making lime plaster, for cleaning. That means establishing water-carrying routes, probably using leather bags or large gourd vessels, maintaining a steady supply throughout whatever period of time people were gathered. Then there's food. The bone deposits show primarily gazelle, with some wild boar, auroch, and other game. Feeding a large gathering requires either bringing preserved meat from successful hunts or conducting large-scale communal hunts during the gathering period. Gazelles are relatively small, maybe 60 to 80 pounds of usable meat per animal. Feed 100 people for a week, and you're looking at dozens of animals. Feed 500 people, and the numbers become staggering. Those who've hunted and processed game know this isn't trivial work. Breaking down a large animal with modern knives and saws still takes time and effort. Now do it with flint tools. Sharp, certainly, but brittle, requiring constant resharpening, breaking if you hit bone wrong. The hide needs to be removed carefully if you want to use it. The meat needs to be cut into portions that can be cooked or preserved. The bones can be cracked for marrow, one of the most nutritious and valued foods available. Nothing gets wasted because waste means more hunting, and hunting is dangerous, time-consuming, and uncertain. Then there's the question of cooking. The archaeological evidence shows fire pits, hearths, and accumulations of fire-cracked rock, stones heated in fires, then dropped into water-filled vessels to bring the water to a boil. This is how you cook before pottery. It's slow and labor-intensive. Want to make stew? Heat stones. Drop them in a leather bag or tightly woven basket filled with water and meat. Wait for it to heat. Add more hot stones as the first ones cool. Repeat for hours until the food is properly cooked. Or you roast meat directly over flames, which is faster but results in a lot of charred outside and potentially undercooked inside. Or you create earth ovens. Dig a pit, line it with hot stones, add the food wrapped in leaves or hide, cover it with earth, and wait hours for the residual heat to cook everything through. All methods work. All require knowledge, experience, and attention. No one's calling for pizza delivery. Shelter presents another challenge. If people were gathering periodically rather than living permanently at the site, they needed temporary structures. Probably simple frameworks of wooden poles covered with hides, bark, or woven plant materials, quick to erect, easy to dismantle, transportable. The archaeological record shows post holes and stake holes around some enclosures, suggesting temporary structures or windbreaks, but nothing permanent, nothing substantial. People came, stayed days or weeks, then departed to their normal territories. Think about camping if you've done much of it. Now imagine camping without tents, without sleeping bags, without Coleman stoves, without any of the lightweight synthetic materials that make modern outdoor living tolerable. You've got leather, plant fiber, wood, stone, and whatever you can carry on your back. Nighttime temperatures in this region can drop dramatically, especially in winter. Without proper shelter and fire, you're in genuine danger of hypothermia. This means gathering fuel constantly, dead wood, dry dung, any combustible material. In a landscape where hundreds of people are camping, the nearby fuel supply gets exhausted quickly. Work parties would need to range farther and farther to collect adequate firewood. Again, organization and planning. Someone coordinates the wood gathering. Someone makes sure each camp area has adequate supply. It's not glamorous work, but it's absolutely essential. Tool maintenance and production would have been constant activities. Stone tools, especially the cutting edges of flint blades, dull or chip with use. You need to constantly produce replacement tools, which means you need skilled knappers, people who know how to work stone, how to predict fracture patterns, how to produce the specific tool forms needed for different tasks. This is another form of specialization. Not everyone can knap high-quality tools. It requires training and talent, hours upon hours of practice, learning to read the stone, control your strikes, manage the angle and force of percussion. The evidence shows that people brought raw material from considerable distances. Different types of flint, obsidian from sources hundreds of miles away, exotic stones valued for their quality or appearance. This indicates trade networks, exchange systems, and the movement of materials across vast territories. It also indicates that gatherings at places like Göbekli Tepe served multiple functions. Religious ceremonies, yes, but also economic exchange, information sharing, marriage arrangements, dispute resolution, storytelling, and cultural transmission. They were nodes in a broader network, places where scattered communities reconnected and reinforced shared identity. Veterans will recognize something familiar in all this: the logistics of temporary encampments, the necessity of organization and discipline when large numbers of people need to be coordinated, the importance of specialists and division of labor, the supply chains and support systems that enable primary operations. The scale is different, but the principles remain constant across human history. Large groups require structure, leadership, and systematic approaches to solve recurring problems. Now we come to the most difficult question, the one that all the archaeology and all the analysis can only partially answer. What did these people believe? What spiritual or religious ideas could motivate the construction of Göbekli Tepe? What rituals were performed within these stone circles? What gods or spirits or ancestors were honored here? The honest answer is we don't know. We can't know, not with certainty, because religious belief and practice leave only indirect traces. We can see the monuments, we can analyze the bones and artifacts, we can map the layout and measure the alignments. But we can't hear the prayers, can't witness the ceremonies, can't interview the priests or shamans or whoever led these gatherings. We're looking at material culture and trying to read minds across 12,000 years. It's archaeology's hardest challenge and its greatest mystery. But we can make informed speculations based on comparative ethnography, on what we know of other hunting and gathering societies, on the symbols and patterns that appear in the archaeological record. Most hunter-gatherer religions are animistic. They see spirit or consciousness in animals, plants, natural features, everything in the environment. The world is alive, ensouled, and humans are part of that animated cosmos rather than separate from it. The boundary between human and animal, between living and dead, between ordinary and sacred, is permeable and constantly negotiated through ritual. The animals carved everywhere at Göbekli Tepe might represent spirit beings, totemic ancestors of different human groups, or doorways to other realms of existence. The vultures, with their association with death and transformation, might have mediated between life and death, helping souls transition from this world to whatever these people believed came next. The snakes, shedding their skins, might have symbolized rebirth and renewal. The predators, boars, possible big cats, might have represented power, danger, and the wild forces humans must negotiate. Some scholars suggest the enclosures themselves were meant to represent the cosmos, that the circular layout mirrors the horizon, that the central pillars represent the axis mundi, the world axis connecting earth and sky, the pathway by which spirits and gods move between realms. This is speculation, but it's informed speculation. Many cultures organize sacred space cosmologically, creating microcosms of their understanding of universal structure. The feasting evidence is significant here. In many societies, communal feasting is inherently sacred, a ritual act that creates and maintains social bonds, honors the dead or the gods, and marks important transitions. The meat you eat is more than food. It's communion, literally incorporating the spiritual power of the hunted animal into the human community. The sharing of food creates obligation and relationship. Those who feast together are bound together. The skull cult evident at later sites like Sayonu might have roots in Göbekli Tepe practices. Many cultures practice secondary burial. The dead are exposed until the flesh is gone, then the bones, particularly the skull, are collected and given special treatment. The skull, housing the brain and face, might be seen as the seat of identity, personality, spirit. Keeping skulls, displaying them, perhaps even consulting them, maintains connection with ancestors. It's not morbid from their perspective. It's honoring and maintaining relationship with those who came before, those who remember when death was more present in daily life, when bodies were washed and prepared at home rather than in funeral parlors, when children saw their grandparents die rather than in distant hospitals, might understand that different cultures have different relationships with death and the dead. What seems macabre to us might have seemed natural and necessary to them. The deliberate burial of the enclosures might also have religious significance. Perhaps the site had served its purpose in some prophesied or cyclical timeline. Perhaps the spiritual power it contained needed to be sealed away for safety. Perhaps, as the world changed and agricultural life replaced hunting and gathering, the old gods or spirits needed to be respectfully laid to rest, along with the monuments built in their honor. We should also consider the possibility of shamanic practices. Shamanism, broadly speaking, involves specialists who enter altered states of consciousness to communicate with the spirit world. These altered states might be achieved through fasting, sleep deprivation, rhythmic drumming or dancing, pain or ordeal, or the use of psychoactive plants. The shaman's role is to bridge the gap between ordinary and spiritual reality, to retrieve lost souls, to divine the future, to heal illness, to negotiate with the powers that control game animals and weather. Did Göbekli Tepe host shamanic rituals? We can't prove it, but it's plausible. The enclosures, with their massive pillars and enclosed spaces, would have been ideal for creating the kind of intense, liminal atmosphere conducive to ritual transformation. The animal carvings might have been more than symbols. They might have been spirit beings that shamans encountered during their journeys in altered states. The darkness, the firelight, the drums or rattles or singing, the smoke, the heightened emotional state of communal ritual, all of this could facilitate the kind of consciousness shifts that shamanic traditions depend upon. Let's talk about legacy, about what Göbekli Tepe means not just for understanding the past, but for how we think about ourselves, our capabilities, our trajectory as a species. This matters because the stories we tell about our origins shape how we imagine our future. If we think humans only developed complexity through agricultural surplus, we have one story about human nature. If we think humans created sacred spaces and complex societies before agriculture, we have a different story entirely. The legacy starts with a simple acknowledgement. Humans have always been capable of more than we assumed. The tendency in archaeology and anthropology has been to underestimate our ancestors, to project our own biases onto the past, to assume that without modern technology, people were somehow less intelligent, less creative, less capable. Göbekli Tepe obliterates that assumption. These people, with stone tools and oral tradition, built something that still awes us 12,000 years later. They weren't primitive, they were people, fully human, intelligent, creative, spiritual, artistic, capable of abstract thought and long-term planning and cooperation on a scale we thought impossible for their supposed level of social development. Their technology was different from ours, yes, but their minds worked exactly like ours. They faced problems and solved them. They dreamed dreams and made them real in stone. They asked questions about meaning and purpose and left answers carved in limestone for us to find millennia later. The second part of the legacy is methodological. Göbekli Tepe reminds us that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. For decades, archaeologists stated confidently that monumental architecture couldn't exist before agriculture because no evidence had been found. Well, no evidence had been found because no one was looking in the right places or asking the right questions. How many other Göbekli Tepes are out there waiting to be discovered? How many other fundamental assumptions about human history are wrong simply because we haven't found the evidence yet? This has practical implications for archaeology as a discipline. It encourages archaeologists to be more open-minded, to take seriously unusual findings rather than dismissing them as anomalies, to revise theories when evidence demands it rather than clinging to comfortable narratives. Science progresses by being wrong in interesting ways, by making claims that can be tested and revised. Göbekli Tepe forced that revision, and the field is better for it. The third legacy is cultural and philosophical. Göbekli Tepe suggests that human spirituality, art, and architecture, the impulse to create beauty and meaning beyond mere survival, might be as fundamental to our nature as tool use or language. We don't just survive, we create meaning, we build monuments, we carve symbols, we gather in sacred spaces. This isn't something that emerges only after basic needs are met. This is part of meeting basic needs, because humans need meaning as much as we need food and shelter. Those who watched humanity go from Kitty Hawk to the moon landing in a single lifetime understand the power of human ingenuity and ambition. We dream big, and sometimes, often, we achieve those dreams. The builders of Göbekli Tepe dreamed of stone circles that would touch the sky, of carved animals that would outlast generations, of sacred spaces where scattered peoples could gather and remember who they were. And they achieved it despite every disadvantage we can imagine, despite working with technology that seems impossibly primitive to us. The fourth legacy is humility. Göbekli Tepe reminds us how much we don't know, how much has been lost. 1,500 years of ritual practice at this one site, and we can barely begin to understand what it meant to the people who built and used it. Thousands of human cultures have existed and disappeared, leaving only fragments for us to puzzle over. The ancestors we know about are a tiny fraction of the ancestors who actually existed. Most of human experience is lost forever, and what remains is fragmentary and ambiguous. This should make us appropriately humble about our knowledge, our theories, our grand narratives. We're doing the best we can with incomplete information, and we should hold our conclusions lightly, ready to revise when new evidence appears. Certainty is the enemy of understanding when dealing with the deep past. Remember that we're still in the early stages of understanding Göbekli Tepe. Only about 5% has been excavated. Ground-penetrating radar and other survey technologies suggest the site is far larger than anyone initially thought. Hundreds of additional pillars remain buried. Entire enclosures wait beneath tons of fill. Every field season brings new discoveries that complicate the picture, add details, and sometimes overturn previous interpretations. In recent years, excavations have revealed residential areas near the main temple complex, something not present in the earliest phases of the site. This suggests that eventually people did begin living permanently at Göbekli Tepe, that the pure pilgrimage model might not hold for the later periods of use. This is exactly the kind of nuance and complexity that emerges when you actually dig rather than just theorize. The reality is always messier, more interesting, and more complicated than our neat models suggest. Other nearby sites continue to be discovered and excavated. The entire region of southeastern Turkey is turning out to be extraordinarily rich in Neolithic archaeology. Each new site adds pieces to the puzzle, showing variations on the basic themes, revealing how widespread and diverse this cultural tradition was. We're not just excavating Göbekli Tepe, we're excavating a world, an entire cultural milieu that flourished and then vanished, leaving only stone monuments to mark its existence. There's tension, as there always is in archaeology, between excavation and preservation. Every time you dig, you destroy context. Every artifact removed from the ground loses the detailed information about exactly where it lay, what was around it, what layer it came from. Modern archaeology is far more careful than the treasure-hunting excavations of the 19th and early 20th centuries, but even with meticulous documentation, excavation is inherently destructive. Some archaeologists argue we should leave most of Göbekli Tepe unexcavated, preserving it for future generations who will have better technology, better methods, better theoretical frameworks for understanding what they find. Others argue that the site is deteriorating, that exposure to weather and tourism is already damaging the excavated portions, that we should excavate carefully now while we still can, and preserve the findings in museums and archives. It's a genuine dilemma with no perfect solution. What we can say is that the team working at Göbekli Tepe, under the Turkish Ministry of Culture and various international partnerships, is doing careful, methodical work. They're publishing their findings. They're training new archaeologists. They're building protective structures to shield exposed areas from erosion. They're creating detailed 3D scans and photographic records so that even if the physical site deteriorates, we'll have accurate digital records. It's not perfect, but it's conscientious. The future of Göbekli Tepe studies will involve technologies we're only beginning to develop. Imagine AI systems that can analyze carved symbols across all the pillars, finding patterns humans might miss. Imagine isotope analysis of bone and tooth enamel that can tell us where individuals came from, how far they traveled to reach the site. Imagine DNA analysis that can reveal familial relationships, population movements, and genetic changes as hunter-gatherers transitioned to farmers. Imagine environmental reconstructions based on pollen, seeds, and ancient climate data that can show us exactly what the landscape looked like 12,000 years ago. All of this is coming. Some of it already exists, but hasn't been applied comprehensively to Göbekli Tepe yet. The site will be studied for generations, producing dissertations and publications and debates for decades to come. We're at the beginning of understanding, not the end. And that's exciting because it means there are still mysteries to solve, questions to answer, revelations waiting in the stone and soil. 12,000 years. Let's sit with that number for a moment, because it's almost impossible to truly comprehend. Those of you who lived through the 1940s and 50s remember 70 or 80 years ago clearly. You can recall the faces, the voices, the specific moments. But 12,000 years? That's roughly 500 human generations. It's a span of time so vast that entire civilizations, Egypt, Rome, the Maya, rose and fell within it, and still only occupy a fraction of that temporal distance. When Göbekli Tepe was built, there was no writing anywhere on Earth. No cities, no agriculture. The wheel wouldn't be invented for another 7,000 years. Metal tools were 7,000 years in the future. The Great Pyramids of Egypt, which we think of as impossibly ancient, were built 7,000 years after Göbekli Tepe was already buried and forgotten. Let that sink in. The pyramids are closer to us in time than they are to Göbekli Tepe. This kind of deep time does strange things to our understanding of history. We tend to think of human civilization as recent, condensed, our entire recorded history fitting into a manageable span. But Göbekli Tepe reminds us that humans were building monuments, creating art, organizing complex societies, and wrestling with spiritual questions for thousands of years before anything we recognize as civilization existed. The story is so much longer, so much more complex than we've imagined. What strikes me most about Göbekli Tepe is how it forces us to reckon with impermanence and the fragility of memory. For 1,500 years, this place was vital, a center of ritual life, a gathering point for scattered communities, a site where people invested enormous labor and creative energy. It mattered. It was important. And then it was deliberately buried and forgotten. Within a few generations, memory of it probably faded to myth, then to vague legend, then to nothing at all. For nearly 12,000 years, it lay hidden. The people who built it died. Their children died. Their culture transformed beyond recognition. Agriculture replaced hunting and gathering. Villages became cities. Writing was invented, and entire libraries were written. Empires rose and conquered and fell into dust. And through all of it, Göbekli Tepe slept beneath its protective mound of earth, patient as stone, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. This should humble us. We build our monuments, skyscrapers, bridges, dams, and assume they'll last forever. But forever is a long time. Will anything we've built survive 12,000 years? Will future archaeologists dig through the ruins of our cities and puzzle over what we believed, what we valued, what we were trying to accomplish? And will they get it right? Or will they misinterpret us as thoroughly as we might be misinterpreting the builders of Göbekli Tepe? Those who served in the military understand institutional memory, the challenge of maintaining traditions and knowledge across changing personnel. Every year, new recruits arrive, veterans retire, and somehow the institution has to preserve its essential character, its skills, its values. Now imagine doing that for 1,500 years, without writing, without any fixed records beyond what can be taught person to person. The fact that Göbekli Tepe maintained consistent architectural and symbolic traditions across that span suggests social institutions of remarkable stability and effectiveness. But eventually, those institutions failed or transformed. The knowledge was lost. The site was buried, and humanity moved on, forgetting that the first temples had been built by hunter-gatherers in the hills of Anatolia. We forgot our own story, and it took 12 millennia and the work of a persistent German archaeologist to recover even a fragment of it. What does Göbekli Tepe reveal about who we are as a species, about the fundamental drives and capabilities that make us human? This matters because understanding our past helps us understand our present and maybe, just maybe, anticipate our future. First, it confirms that the impulse toward meaning-making is fundamental to human nature. We don't just survive, we need to understand why we survive, what it means to be alive, how we fit into the larger patterns of existence. The builders of Göbekli Tepe, struggling to survive in a world without agriculture or metal tools, still found it necessary, not optional, necessary to build monuments that addressed these questions. They carved animals into stone, not just to record what they'd seen, but to grapple with the mystery of life and death, predator and prey, human and animal. This suggests that materialism, the idea that humans are primarily motivated by physical needs and economic self-interest, is incomplete at best. Yes, we need food and shelter and safety, but we also need meaning, purpose, beauty, connection to something larger than ourselves. We need it so badly that people without surplus, without leisure time, without the supposed prerequisites for cultural complexity, still created sophisticated symbolic systems and monumental architecture to address that need. Second, Göbekli Tepe demonstrates that cooperation and social organization are as fundamental to human success as individual cleverness. You don't build this place alone. You don't even build it with a small group working independently. You need coordination across multiple communities, pooling of labor and resources, agreement on design and purpose, maintenance of traditions across generations. The social intelligence required to organize Göbekli Tepe's construction rivals the technical intelligence required to execute it. This matters in our contemporary world, where individualism is often celebrated at the expense of collective action. The monuments that define us as a species, from Göbekli Tepe to the pyramids to Gothic cathedrals to the Apollo program, all required massive cooperation, people subordinating individual interests to shared goals. We accomplish our greatest achievements together, not alone. Third, the psyche reveals that humans have always been capable of long-term thinking and delayed gratification on a scale that would impress even the most disciplined modern project manager. Think about starting to build something that won't be finished in your lifetime, that your children won't see completed, that might require generations to accomplish. Think about working toward goals whose benefits you'll never personally enjoy. This is the opposite of the short-term, immediate gratification mindset we sometimes assume is natural to humans. Those who worked on projects that took years or decades to complete, building the interstate highway system, establishing institutions, raising children to carry on values and traditions, understand this kind of thinking. You plant trees whose shade you'll never sit in. You build things that will outlast you. You invest in futures you won't personally see. This capacity for intergenerational thinking and action might be what defines us most clearly as human. Fourth, Göbekli Tepe shows that the relationship between technology and culture is more complex than we usually assume. Advanced technology doesn't automatically produce sophisticated culture, and lack of advanced technology doesn't prevent cultural sophistication. The builders of Göbekli Tepe had Stone Age technology, but produced something as culturally sophisticated as anything built since. They understood geometry, organization, symbolism, and artistic expression at levels that would be respectable in any era. This should make us question technological determinism, the idea that human history is primarily driven by technological advancement. Technology matters, certainly, but culture, belief, social organization, and human creativity matter just as much or more. The question isn't just what tools you have, but what you choose to do with them, what visions you pursue, what meanings you create. For those who've had the opportunity to visit Göbekli Tepe, the experience is often described as profound, even spiritual. Despite whatever religious beliefs or skepticism visitors might hold, there's something about standing among those massive pillars, looking at carvings made by hands 12,000 years dead, that affects people in ways that photographs and descriptions can't quite capture. Part of it is scale. The pillars are genuinely massive, towering overhead, making even tall adults feel small. They weren't built human-sized. They were built to impress, to awe, to create a sense of standing in the presence of something greater. And they still work. 12,000 years later, they still command respect, still make you feel that this place is special, set apart, sacred in some fundamental way that transcends any particular religious tradition. Part of it is age. 12,000 years isn't just a number, it's a felt presence. The stone is weathered, eroded, patina covered. It looks old. You can see the weight of millennia in every surface. And knowing that these stones were already ancient when the pyramids were built, that they were raised by people we can barely imagine, creates a kind of temporal vertigo. You're standing in a place that connects you to the deepest roots of human civilization. But I think the deepest effect comes from recognition. Looking at those carved animals, you recognize the artistic impulse that created them. Looking at the circular arrangement of pillars, you recognize the organizing intelligence that planned it. Looking at the scale of the construction, you recognize the determination and cooperation that achieved it. These weren't aliens. These weren't some fundamentally different species. These were us, humans like us, thinking like us, creating like us. And if they were capable of this 12,000 years ago, with stone tools and oral tradition, what might we be capable of? What are we failing to achieve, not because we lack the capability, but because we lack the shared vision, the collective will, the long-term commitment that motivated them? The comparison can be humbling. We have technology they couldn't dream of. Computers, aircraft, nuclear power, genetic engineering. We have accumulated knowledge spanning millennia. We have population and resources that dwarf what was available to them. And yet, could we coordinate labor on this scale without coercion? Could we maintain traditions across 1,500 years without writing? Could we create monuments that would still be impressive and mysterious 12,000 years from now? Those of you who've traveled to ancient sites around the world, the Colosseum, the Great Wall, Angkor Wat, Machu Picchu, know that feeling of standing in the presence of human achievement from the distant past. There's a mixture of admiration and melancholy, appreciation for what was accomplished and sadness for what was lost. Göbekli Tepe evokes that feeling more intensely than almost any other site because the temporal distance is so vast and the mystery is so complete. We stand among these stones as visitors from another world. The builders wouldn't recognize anything about our civilization, our technology, our clothing, our languages, our beliefs, our social structures. And yet, if one of them could somehow stand beside us, looking at their own work, I think we would understand each other in the ways that matter most. We would recognize the shared humanity, the common impulses that drive us to create, to build, to leave something behind that says, we were here, we mattered, we made meaning from existence. Let's be honest about what we don't know, because the gaps in our knowledge are as important as what we've learned. Archaeology deals with fragments, with incomplete evidence, with material remains that can never tell us everything we want to know. The questions that remain about Göbekli Tepe could fill volumes. We don't know what language the builders spoke. We don't know what they called themselves or this place. We don't know their names for the animals carved on the pillars or what those animals represented. We don't know the specific rituals performed here, the prayers spoken, the myths told. We don't know their cosmology, their explanation for how the world came to be, and what awaited after death. All of this, the entire rich interior life of these people, is silent, lost to time. We don't know definitively why the site was buried. Though we have theories, we don't know if it was a single decision made at one moment or a gradual process spanning generations. We don't know if the burial was protective, punitive, or simply the natural conclusion of something that had run its course. The pillars can't tell us, and no written records exist to explain. We don't know the organizational structure that made construction possible. Who led? How were decisions made? Was there a priesthood? A chief? A council of elders? How were labor obligations determined? What motivated people to contribute? Religious devotion, social pressure, economic exchange, cultural identity. The social machinery that produced Göbekli Tepe operated for 15 centuries, but we can only guess at how it functioned. We don't know the relationship between Göbekli Tepe and other contemporary sites. Was it the center of a regional network? One of several competing centers? A unique achievement without parallel? As more sites are discovered and excavated, this picture is becoming clearer. But vast uncertainties remain. We don't even know with absolute certainty that our basic interpretation is correct. Maybe it wasn't primarily a temple. Maybe it served functions we haven't imagined. An astronomical observatory, a gathering place for trade and exchange, a territorial marker, or something that combined all these functions in ways that don't fit our modern categories. We're interpreting based on fragmentary evidence and comparison with other cultures, but we could be fundamentally wrong about major aspects. This uncertainty isn't failure, it's honesty. Science progresses by acknowledging what we don't know as clearly as what we do know. The questions drive further research, further excavation, further analysis. Each answer reveals new questions, deeper mysteries, unexpected complexities. This is how understanding grows. Those who lived through the transformation of physics with quantum mechanics, or biology with DNA, or cosmology with the Big Bang, understand how revolutionary discoveries don't end mystery. They deepen it in productive ways. We know more about Göbekli Tepe than we did 30 years ago, but the more we learn, the more complex the picture becomes. That's not frustrating. That's exciting. It means there's always more to discover, and perhaps some mysteries should remain mysteries. Perhaps it's appropriate that we can never fully know what these people believed, what they experienced, what drove them to build these monuments. The distance between us and them, temporal, cultural, experiential, is real and unbridgeable in some fundamental ways. We can study, we can speculate, we can use every tool of modern science, but we'll never stand where they stood, see the world as they saw it, feel what they felt when they gathered in these stone circles under ancient stars. Maybe that's okay. Maybe the mystery is part of what makes Göbekli Tepe important. What keeps us coming back to it, thinking about it, trying to understand. If we knew everything, if it was all explained and cataloged and filed away, maybe it would lose some of its power to move us, to challenge us, to make us reconsider who we are and where we came from. There's something profound about stone as a medium for human expression. Clay can be reshaped, wood rots and burns, metal corrodes, fabric disintegrates, but stone persists. Göbekli Tepe has survived 12,000 years, not through active preservation, but through the simple durability of limestone. The builders chose their medium well, whether they realized it or not. Stone is patient. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't require maintenance or worship or remembrance to continue existing. It simply is, year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium. Human empires rise and fall. Languages are born and die. Technologies are invented and forgotten, and the stone remains, indifferent to human drama, carrying its cargo of symbols into an unimaginable future. This makes stone an appropriate medium for sacred space, for monuments meant to address eternal questions. The concerns that motivated Göbekli Tepe's construction, the relationship between human and animal, life and death, the seen and unseen worlds, these aren't questions that get solved and filed away. They're the permanent questions, the ones every generation must grapple with anew. Stone's permanence matches the permanence of these fundamental human concerns. But there's another kind of persistence worth considering, the persistence of spirit, of human creativity, of the impulse to make meaning from existence. The bodies that built Göbekli Tepe are long dust. The specific beliefs that motivated them are lost. The social structures that organized the work have dissolved. Yet something persists. The questions they asked, the creativity they expressed, the determination they embodied. Every time someone stands among those pillars and feels moved, every time an archaeologist carefully brushes dirt from a carved surface, every time a child sees a photograph and asks, "Who built that?" the spirit of Göbekli Tepe lives again. Not literally, not mystically, but in the sense that human creativity and questioning and meaning-making is continuous across time. We're doing the same things they did, asking why we're here, what it means to be human, how we should live, what we should value. The specific answers change, but the questions persist. Those who've lost friends and family over the decades, who've watched generations pass, understand how the physical is temporary, but something else continues. Not unchanged. Everything changes, but persisting in transformed ways. The builders of Göbekli Tepe are gone, but their work sparks thoughts and questions in our minds 12,000 years later. Through the medium of stone, across an almost inconceivable span of time, they still speak to us. Not in words we can understand, but in the universal language of human aspiration and creative achievement. If Göbekli Tepe makes a demand of us, It's this: think longer. Build for permanence, not just for profit or convenience. Create meaning, not just wealth. Cooperate toward shared visions, not just compete for individual gain. Remember that we're part of a story that began long before us and will continue long after we're gone. This isn't nostalgia or primitivism. We can't and shouldn't try to recreate hunter-gatherer society. We can't uninvent agriculture or industry or digital technology. The world has changed, and mostly for the better in terms of human welfare, lifespan, and opportunity. But we can learn from what Göbekli Tepe reveals about human capability and motivation. We can recognize that our ancestors, without any of our technological advantages, were capable of remarkable achievements motivated by belief, community, and the search for meaning. If they could do that much with so little, what might we accomplish if we aligned our considerable resources toward shared goals that matter? We can challenge the assumption that economic considerations must always take precedence over cultural, spiritual, or aesthetic concerns. The builders of Göbekli Tepe invested enormous resources in something that didn't directly feed anyone or provide shelter or increase reproductive success. They did it because it mattered to them in ways that transcended immediate material benefit. What are we willing to invest in for reasons beyond economic return? We can remember that the greatest human achievements require cooperation across communities, often across generations. Nothing important is built alone. The individualism so celebrated in modern culture has its place, but it can't build Göbekli Tepe. It can't address climate change. It can't explore space. It can't solve the big problems that require coordinated action on a massive scale. The social intelligence required to organize collective action is as important as individual brilliance. We can think in longer time scales. What we do today affects not just tomorrow or next year, but decades, centuries, potentially millennia into the future. The builders of Göbekli Tepe thought in terms that transcended individual lifetimes. They planted forests whose shade they'd never sit in. We face challenges, environmental, social, technological, that require similar long-term thinking. What are we willing to start now that won't pay off in our lifetimes, but will benefit our descendants? Those who served know about leaving things better than you found them, about institutional continuity, about sacrifice for future generations. You didn't fight in wars for your own immediate benefit. You served so that your children and grandchildren could live in a better, safer, freer world. That's the same impulse that built Göbekli Tepe. Investment in future benefit, cooperation towards shared goals, willingness to contribute to something larger than yourself. As the light fades and we near the end of our time with Göbekli Tepe, I find myself thinking about silence. Not the absence of sound, but the deeper silence of things that can't speak, questions that can't be answered, voices that time has taken beyond recovery. The stones are silent. They'll never tell us directly what they meant to the people who carved them. They'll never explain the rituals performed around them, the beliefs that motivated their creation, the prayers offered in their presence. The silence is complete, absolute, unbridgeable by any technology or method. We can measure and analyze and theorize, but we can't make the stones speak. And yet, that silence isn't empty. It's full of possibility, of mystery, of the profound recognition that we stand in the presence of something important that we can only partially understand. The silence invites contemplation, encourages humility, reminds us that human experience is vast and varied, and mostly lost to time. We know so little, really, about the full richness of human cultural expression across our species' history. There's something appropriate about this. The deepest questions: why are we here? What does it mean to exist? How should we live? These don't have simple answers that can be stated once and accepted forever. They're the questions that each person, each generation, each culture must ask anew. The stones of Göbekli Tepe mark where our ancestors asked those questions 12,000 years ago. They give no final answers, but they testify that the questions matter, have always mattered, will always matter. Those who've lived long enough to watch the world change dramatically, from depression to prosperity, from World War to moon landing, from telephone operators to smartphones, understand that specifics change while fundamentals persist. The technology transforms, the social structures evolve, the languages and customs shift, but humans are still asking the same essential questions, still trying to make meaning from existence, still building and creating and seeking connection with something larger than themselves. Göbekli Tepe stands as testament to that continuity. The builders are gone, but we remain, carrying forward the same human impulses that motivated them. We ask our own versions of their questions. We build our own monuments. We create our own meanings. And someday, if our monuments survive, future humans will stand where we stood and ask their own questions, trying to understand what we valued, what we believed, what we were trying to accomplish. The circle continues. That's what Göbekli Tepe teaches most clearly. That human culture is continuous, evolving, but fundamentally connected across vast reaches of time. We're not separate from the past. We're its continuation, its latest iteration, its current expression. The same creative impulse that raised those stone pillars drives us today to build, to question, to seek, to create meaning from the chaos of existence. And in that recognition, perhaps lies hope. If they could do so much with so little, maybe we can do better with our abundance. If they could maintain traditions across 15 centuries without writing, maybe we can solve problems that require sustained commitment across generations. If they could cooperate to build monuments that still inspire awe 12,000 years later, maybe we can cooperate to address the challenges we face. We began this journey with a question. What if everything we thought we knew about civilization was wrong? We've explored the evidence, examined the theories, acknowledged the mysteries that remain, and we've discovered something profound. Not that everything was wrong necessarily, but that reality was more complex, more interesting, more surprising than our neat theories allowed. Göbekli Tepe doesn't overturn human history so much as it deepens it, adds texture and nuance, reveals capabilities we didn't know existed, and motivations we didn't adequately appreciate. It makes our ancestors more human, not less, showing them as creative, spiritual, organized, determined, capable of remarkable achievements motivated by belief and community, rather than just survival and economic calculation. And in doing so, It makes us more human, too. We're not the culmination of progress, the end point of some linear trajectory from primitive to civilized. We're just the latest chapter in a very long story, carrying forward impulses and capabilities that were already fully developed 12,000 years ago. Our technology has advanced dramatically. Our fundamental humanity hasn't changed at all. The pillars stand where they've stood for 12 millennia, patient witnesses to the human story. They'll stand for millennia more probably, long after everyone currently alive has returned to dust. They'll see civilizations rise and fall. They'll see technologies we can't imagine, invented and abandoned. They'll watch as the questions they embody, the eternal human questions, are asked again and again by generation after generation, each finding their own provisional answers, none finding final ones. And perhaps that's okay. Perhaps the questions matter more than the answers. Perhaps the asking, the grappling with meaning, the building of monuments, the carving of symbols, perhaps that's what makes us human. Not the conclusions we reach, but the fact that we care enough to ask in the first place. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, as consciousness loosens its grip and dreams begin, think about those ancient hands chipping away at limestone day after day, year after year, creating forms that would outlast their creators by 12,000 years and counting. Think about the determination that required, the faith that their work mattered, the hope that future generations would see and understand. And remember, they succeeded. We're here, 12,000 years later, asking questions about them, honoring their achievement, marveling at what they accomplished. Their monuments have become our inheritance. Their questions, our questions. Their creativity, our inspiration. And someday, if we build well and choose wisely and think long enough, maybe our descendants will stand among whatever we leave behind and feel the same sense of connection, the same recognition of shared humanity across vast gulfs of time. Maybe they'll see that we tried, that we built, that we asked the important questions, even if we didn't find all the answers. The stones of Göbekli Tepe offer no final words, no ultimate revelations, no neat conclusions. They simply stand, patient and permanent, marking where our ancestors paused in their journey to build something sacred, something beautiful, something that would endure. In that silence, that patience, that permanence, perhaps we find all the answer we need. If tonight's journey through the world's first temple stirred thoughts or memories, if you visited ancient sites that moved you, or if you simply have reflections on what it means to be human across vast stretches of time, I'd be honored if you shared them below. Your generation has witnessed transformations in human society that parallel in their way the transformations that followed Göbekli Tepe. The perspective you bring, the history you've lived through, the long view you've earned through decades of experience. These matter. The comment section is yours if you're inclined to share. Now rest well, knowing you're part of a story that stretches back 12,000 years and forward into a future we can't imagine. Knowing that the same questions your ancestors asked, you ask still. Knowing that the same creativity, the same seeking, the same determination that raised those stone pillars lives on in every generation. The past may be silent, but it speaks to those willing to listen. Tonight, perhaps, you've heard its whisper across the centuries. Sleep well, and I'll see you in the next one